which then goes into lesson number 7. And that is, don't be afraid to try new things. Not everything is going to work. I've had plenty of disasters in my life, but everything that you try is at least valuable, right? So one of my jobs at the Pentagon was to prepare meeting materials, which I'm sure a lot of you who are on the call, who are admin folks, you make sure that every meeting that your executive goes to, they have the proper background materials. Now, keep in mind, this was the early 2000s, right? So this was 2007, 2008 timeframe. And for every single meeting that my general went to, he had a binder, not just like a folder, but he had a binder that had all kinds of, information about it. And so one of the things that I told you before, I'm a techie type person, and so is he, thank goodness. So we got along very well with that. But in the early 2000s, the DoD had the BlackBerry, right? For any of you folks, I am dating myself a little bit, but for any of you folks that remember the BlackBerry, that's what we had. And the smartphones were just starting to come out. The tablets and the iPad was just starting to come out. And so my boss, my general at the time, came out and said, hey, what can we do to get rid of some of these binders? Why don't we use a tablet? And I was like, genius, right? And so I thought it was a great idea. So we kind of ran that upstairs to the Secretary of Defense's office and, to the IT guys. And of course, in, typical Department of Defense fashion, moving at a glacial pace, they said no. And so we badgered them a little bit more, and they said, okay, well, here, you can use this, right? So they gave me an iPad, and they said, here, you can use this. But they had stripped everything out of it, right? They had stripped everything out. There were no apps. There was no program. There was no wireless capability. They physically pulled stuff out of this that made it do what we wanted it to do. And so my general at the time said, okay, we're gonna do something new. He said, make it work, right? He gave me a stripped down iPad and a laptop and said, how are we gonna make this work? How are you gonna take all of these binders and put it on here? And if you know anything about admin folks, we are the queens and kings of making it work. That is what we do. And so that was the task ahead of me. And there were a lot of trial and errors, but I eventually figured out how we can, maneuver with what they gave me, and make it work. And there's a picture that I absolutely love, right? There's a picture that I love of my boss at the White House Situation Room, and it's him sitting down at the table. And you've got the president and other National Security Council members, and they're kind of crowded around him, and they're staring at his iPad, and they're just, pointing to all of this because he walked into that very first meeting, that very first day. Everybody else has their binders open and they have stacks of paper and stuff. And he walks in with nothing but his iPad and puts his iPad down on the table. And he's like, we've made it work. And I was so excited when I saw this picture, but and my kids will tell you that now when I watch movies and I see, somebody, especially in the Pentagon or in the White House or any really federal agency, and they've got their smartphone or they've got their tablet and they're talking classified information, I look at my kids and I'm like, yeah, I did that. But it's very exciting. But the whole point is, don't be afraid to try new things. It took me a little while, but I got there and it did work. It was clunky. I don't think that they cannot be using the same process because it was so bad, but it did work. And so that is the lesson that I learned there.